All right, well, good evening, folks. Why don't we go ahead and begin this informational session of the Mishawaka Common Council. And tonight, we are going to receive some information from our friends and colleagues in the administration with regard to some utility rate-related issues. So after we give Mr. Benicki a chance to get settled in.
Ready to rock.
Good man. All right, we will begin. Mr. Mayor or whomever, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President, council members, Dave Wood, Mayor. Here to talk about an issue that's become a little familiar to us as we have met about this, I believe in December, to talk about this issue. I will not be here to talk about a lot of detail, just big picture, but we do have our electric superintendent, Kevin Wasmer's here. Alex from Baker Tilly is here should you need his, if you have a question. Also, we have our utility board president, Ken Prince, is here. And so, how did we get here? First of all, we have been here before. This is a bill that has come due that we have to pay, plain and simple. I kind of refer to it as our utility bill. We have a contract to purchase utilities wholesale, and to get those utilities here, we don't own that infrastructure, so we have to pay the bill for that electric power to come into our distribution system. And so we don't control what is charged to us, and like we're seeing out there in the public with about everything else, the price has gone up, and quite substantially. We don't control it. We have to pay it. And I almost liken it to the old tracker that used to drive us crazy and drove me crazy when I was on the council. Made our, it was the transmission cost to get power to Mishawaka. We passed it along to the customer, so it would cause our customers' bills to fluctuate wildly sometimes. So we came up with a little different model to try to control some of that volatility, but it still fluctuated. And so now we have a new wholesale purchase power, our power provider. We have set our rates, and our rates have gone down. Our rates are not going up. This is the pass-through charge. It's separate from our power rates. We're not raising electric rates here. Whether we were still with I&M, AEP, or now with Wolverine, we still have to pay this. It would not have changed. We don't have much recourse. We've looked into it. We can file a complaint with FERC maybe, but the bill has come due and we have to pay it. And one thing I will not do is jeopardize power to our customers, to our residents. So we will pay the bill. We'll pursue any kind of, process possible to go back and look at it, but that's where we are. Why are we before the council? Because the council asked that we, a few years back, that we bring any kind of rate issue to the council. And so we are here to do that, and we're open for discussion on that. This is a pass-through. It's not necessarily in our power to not pay it or to do anything about it. I don't know that you want it in your power, but we have to, we run a nonprofit utility, and we can't afford to absorb these rather large, volatile expenses. And so they have to be passed through. So we're here to kind of tell you about it, inform you about it, what may be the causes, and so we'll get into that in a little more detail. But I don't like it at all. I know you don't like it at all. It is the bill, and we have to pay it.
Thank you. Any questions for Mayor Wood? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I got a handout too to give you guys.
Please.
It's a little easier than using the screen up there.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, looks like I think everybody has a copy. Again, Kevin Wasmer, Mishawaka Utilities Electric Division Manager. The handout I gave you would be what you guys got in the email, I think about 2 weeks ago. So if it looks familiar, that's why. Just to go through it, this is what Baker Tilly kind of gave to us to give us a heads up that our purchasing power versus what we're getting back in revenue is exceeding what we are receiving. So if you look at it, I think November we did this meeting the first time, and you guys asked, you know, let's see what the first of the year looks like after looking at this initially in, I think it was November, that the numbers would either be better or worse. We predicted they would be worse, and as you can see on paper, they are actually a little bit more expensive than we first encountered the problem last year. So last year looked like we were about 5 million short. This year looks like it's going to cost us an additional $7 million for the same purchasing of the power. So a lot of it was due to what we had figured was AEP is doing a lot of regional work here. So the cost for them to get the power to us is going up, not just us as the Mishawaka Utilities, but also everybody in this region, you know, the other smaller municipals as well. The cost, from what we can gather, is roughly $1 billion or more that they've been putting into the system since about 2018. And looking at the rates for what we purchased the power for, if you want to go down to, go to the summary key results, just under there, if you look at the charts a little easier. So 2019, 2020, if you see the green part, right here, we're at. So if we start there, originally, it looks like our billing would have been about $80 a month on the average home, about 700 kilowatts. 700 kilowatts, roughly 15 to 2,000 square foot home, kind of size-wise. So we're looking at the $80. That's got a slash in it because that was the same year that we switched halfway through and went to Wolverine Power Supply. Then we saw the initial savings, which you'll see in 2021. You'll see the cost went down to $74.70 a month. So that's where you're seeing your initial savings. So it was projected with the current rate base that's in here right now that the PGM and transmission charges would have stayed about the same or increased at a smaller increase. Unfortunately, they increased at a higher level than what we had anticipated. So if you look at the far right one, it'll say $78.70 a month. So the last one there shows with the proposed pass-through to, you know, basically break us even every year is the goal here. I can tell you right now, last year, since we waited to the end of the year, waited till January to see what our numbers looked like, we had 7 out of 12 months that were in the red for the utilities. So the initial savings goal here didn't actually pan out towards the end. So the cost of the transmission here is getting to be so expensive that we're not actually even breaking even every month right now. So we're seeing negative numbers 7 out of 12 months. And we've also started this first month this year, $300,000 in the red. So that's my concern moving forward is, due to the large cost, we're not actually charging the customers more money. I know it's more money on the chart when you look at it, but it's just the pass-through, which is based on what costs are going on in our region, how much it costs to get the power to us, which fluctuates every year, as we talked about with, not to confuse everybody, but the winter peak, summer peak, when we were talking about that, you know, the dollar amounts are going up, the dollar amount per kilowatt's going up, but our peak went up because we got hit with a summer peak versus a winter peak. I know it gets a little more confusing, but as the time goes on, it could be better, it could be less, but they're projecting it to still keep going up because of their improvements in the area. So on the bottom, so under those charts, you'll see the 3 prices we did. Under there it says, you know, rates would have remained over $90 had we not switched. So that's the first sentence under the 3 paragraph, or the 3 charts there. So PGM transmission charges could not be locked in with Wolverine agreement 2 years ago. That's pretty common, because like we just said, you know, the price goes up and down so much that a power supply company's not gonna lock in a rate, because they don't know what the rate's gonna be the next year either to get the power to us. So, if you look at the PGM interconnection charges, the chart on the bottom is what I'm talking about. So as you look, it goes way up. 2019 just happened to be the year when we switched. The improvements started middle of 2018, 19, 20, and you can see the cost is just going up to what we're being charged for these improvements in the area. And then we can switch a page. So the sharp increases in transmission rates combined with the increase of the peak loads that I was mentioning earlier, the city's driving the city's bottom line for transmission costs and growth. So all of the AEP zone IMDA members, we're part of IMDA, there's about, I think 7 of us total left right now, are seeing the same rate increase. The dollar amount's obviously not the same because we're about 10 times larger than most of the other utilities. So we're the second largest in the state of Indiana, so some of our other members that are on this, it's small amounts because their load is nowhere near what we are. You know, we're 138, they're about 4. So the dollar amounts they're not there. So comparison-wise, they're seeing the same thing, but the dollar amount's not the same because their loads are not the same.
Kevin, can I just ask a quick question? So when you're
Yeah.
saying, are you saying that their percentage of increase is the same, but the
Correct.
dollar amounts are different?
Correct.
Thank
yes,
you.
because they're being multiplied by a 4 megawatt load. We're 138
Okay,
essentially. So it's, you know, more than 10 times that.
okay, thank you.
Sure. So going through the charts, you'll see the transmission rate per megawatt day. You'll see that green one. I know it's kind of confusing, the zigzag. The green one is going up, so it's on the dollar amount to the left. Right now, we're up to about $300 at the end here, 2022 we're looking at. You know, 2019, I know our chart only goes to 19 on the other sheet. I'm just trying to stick with 2019 to 2022. If you look straight up, they were actually pretty low. They were around the under $200 mark, and then it just keeps ticking up from there. You know, it's forecasted to keep going, obviously, with the improvements they're doing. So despite the transmission changes, energy and demand charges have fallen over 50% with Wolverine. So to kind of clarify that sentence right there, if you go all the way to the bottom chart, you got 1, 2, 3, you got 4 of them, right, on the bottom. So under the purchase power bill charge, so where we're saying we fell 50%, just to kind of clarify where the 50% is coming from. If you look at your bottom charts, that teal color, so the first one in 2019 was $25 million under the AEP contract. So where we saved most of our money was when we switched, we're not getting that demand charge anymore. So if you look, it dropped down to about 11, right? And then the following year, 2021, it went down to 5. And then again in 2022, it's back up to about 7, but nothing near the 25 million. So that was kind of what drove our old pricing with AEP, was that demand charge. So we've alleviated one problem. And then you'll see in 2022, the bill for total purchase power at the top of that blue second bar over says $35,906,237. And then that was the end of the kind of the half year, right? Because we did a half year with AEP for the true up. That's no longer happening anymore. So then in 2021, we anticipated the cost to stay roughly around the 35 million or less. And you can see it's creeped up to 39 million last year total. And then this year, total purchase power is gonna be at 43 million. So it's still less than we started in 19. And if you look at our rates, since they're color coordinated, they're going down. I know the colors are really hard to see. It's probably easier on the screen, but the dark blue and the black lettering is not that great. But the bottom one is the one that we're concerned about the most. So we kind of have like a cap set with our rate. The base that was made in 2018 was about $10 million to absorb for PGM costs. And we projected that to happen 5 to 7% every year to go up a little bit. And it went up, you know, $5 million instead of what we anticipated, which would have been about 200,000 per year. So that's why we have this little pass-through recovery in the hashes that you can see that we're proposing to make up the $7 million for 2022 shortfall. As you can see, the PGM costs now are going to be over $17,492, which is over the 10 million that we kind of fudged in with all the numbers, rates, and discounts over the 2 years, the 7% last year, and then the 7% discount this year. You'll see it gets all eaten up, unfortunately, with this new PGM tracking. Well, I shouldn't say tracker, but the new PGM charges. So that's why we're here asking, you know, showing you that there's a need here because we can't absorb the costs anymore moving forward. Any questions? I'm sure there's plenty.
Any questions? Mr. Kaufman?
Thank you, Mr. President. Kevin, thank you for this. I appreciate this. This is helpful. I had questions. I wasn't here last time, as you know, and I'm sorry about that, but I understood from other council members that other communities weren't seeing these increases. What I'm hearing from you is because of the size of our utility is the reason we're seeing the larger numbers. But as Councilman Volker asked, she asked if the percentages were the same for a Walkerton. I don't know if they're on this, but let's say they are.
Sure.
A small community. They're seeing PJM costs go up at the same percentage rate that we are. We're just seeing larger dollar amounts.
Correct.
Okay. PJM is not AEP, correct?
Well, yes and no. So PGM is not necessarily AEP that we were buying power from originally, but AEP owns the transmission lines from all the power plants, solar fields, whatever they are, going east. So it's kind of a different, they own the,
So it's a subsidiary, if you will,
correct,
of AEP. It's their own little,
correct.
for
It's
business
basically how the
purposes,
power gets from,
they've set it up separately for their business
yeah, it
purposes.
gets from Indiana to Ohio through AEP. There's no other way to get there.
So in effect, PJM is AEP's transmission cost.
Correct.
Is there a point when it just doesn't make sense for us to be a utility? Do people in South Bend see these rate increases at the percentage? Are they seeing these transmission costs added to their bills as we are? Or are people who are on, just pay AEP for their bill? Are they seeing these cost increases at a similar percentage, plus whatever rate increases they?
It's a little higher. So, yeah, I'm actually not on our power here, so I do have I'm in the county. And, yeah, mine's double what we're looking at. But, I mean, mine's over $20 a month. Just for PGM by itself alone. It's a separate,
So it's a line item on your bill?
correct. So, yeah, the rates are a lot higher outside of here than what we're looking at.
So in 2022, we're catching up for 21 and paying 22 as well?
Correct.
It looks at least about half of 21 is what we're catching up.
Right, half. I mean, I obviously can't take it for the whole year. We did, like I said, we were waiting to the end of the year to see how we ended up going through, moving forward, and it looks like we pretty much broke even. And now when I say break even, I mean, it's really only because we also had a bond last year. So we had spent money on our Union substation that we're currently converting. And all the money that we had spent, we were able to get that back through the bond repayment. Had we not been able to retrieve that money, we probably would have had a negative last year as well. So I call it a wash for last year because it's really borrowed money from the bond. And you can't really borrow from it, but you can reimburse yourself for what we spent. But since last year, moving forward this year, we cannot do that. That bond can only go towards anything going to the 4 kV circuits only. So there's no more option to break even or call it a cushion. There's nothing there.
Thank you.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
Mrs. Volker?
Hi, thanks. Kevin, I'm just not a genius in math, but if we borrowed money from the bond, we have to repay that money, correct?
Correct. So our bond was $10 million to put in over a 3-year period.
Right.
So yeah, we have a monthly payment in that. That is also within our rate. There's a monthly dollar amount for it. I don't have it off the top of my head. But that money, we didn't really borrow it. We just reimbursed ourselves for the project because the money was, the bond was for the 4 kV that we did. We already started. So we're able to really reimburse ourselves for what we spent. It wasn't really borrowing, it's a reimbursement. But yeah, the $10 million investment was for the 4 kV, 12 kV conversion. So basically the city, to make it easy, from McKinley south is pretty much where all the 4 kV work's gonna go. So any work that happens outside of McKinley north, which is pretty much a lot of our development, cannot come out of the bond money. That has to come out of our normal revenue. And right now it looks very depleted. So that's my concern.
Thank you.
Mr. Mamlani?
Thank you, Mr. Hicksonball. Thank you, Kevin, for your presentation. Just to ask a question regarding your comment
Sure.
You said you reside in the county and your rates, your increase is gonna be much larger than ours. You said yours is about 20.
Correct.
Compared to our projected 4 per month? Is that what you're,
I think it was six.
Total's actually gonna be 9, if you look at.
9?
we'll
Oh,
go back.
924?
Yeah, so if you look at the front page,
984.
all the way over to the right, it's $9.24.
I got you, okay.
Guessed at about 700 kilowatt usage. The $4 increase notice when you put in there, it'll say, the impact of the 2022 bill is really a $4 increase because we had a 7% reduction this year as well. So the total overall cost, that's why it's in there in the actual chart at 9.
Okay.
And if you look at the chart, 74.70 for 2021 at your bill.
Yeah.
And it's only 78.70. So instead of just making it, hide it like it's $4, when it show it really is 9, but it should feel like a $4 impact.
Okay.
That way we're being fully transparent, not trying to hide anything.
Sure. So in the county, you're going up approximately $20
It is
versus.
Yeah, I just checked, it was 1890 something and change this last month. So
Okay.
outside of here, seeing a lot larger increase. And I think we had a note in here too, if you look right above those charts, the second, well, it'd be third one down or second one up there. Or sorry, last one, I&M retail customers are seeing a 0.02328 cents per kilowatt. We're only proposing a 0.013. So that alone's a lot smaller. And again, that's, gonna be yearly driven, so whenever we implement it, say it's March, then in 12 months, we'd revisit and see what it looks like. Everything goes great, we have a winter peak, which we're due pretty soon. Then that, that may be, I don't know what the number would be, could be half, could be less. It's just gonna go once a year charge on that. So we have like the $10 million cap, and then our growth every year, and I think, Alex, 5%, we're thinking for the 10 million?
So, yeah, I mean, there won't be any other additional growth in
Right.
the base rates for that.
Okay.
I mean, our 10 million, essentially anything over 10 million at this point is what's gonna have to come from the pass-through.
Okay, so to clarify that one more time then, so it's the 10 million is our cutoff, so we're right at 17, so we go back to the second page, sorry. Go all the way to the bottom on that one, so for 2022, if our cap for these rates that we have with the 2-year discount, everything we're saying is $10 million, the Mishawaka Utilities is all in on what we can afford. We're at 17 million, so it looks like a $7 million negative. So last year, we were 4 million some dollars change short, which I did try to make that up in the budget this year. I took out a lot of stuff, and I met with Woody on a few things, but I took out a building that we were gonna do, we cut our substation projects wishes that we wanted to do, again, outside of the bond area, so we're talking north. Some of the northern areas, we took out over $4 million alone just to try and make it a wash, anticipating moving forward with this pass-through. I won't be able to do that every year, eventually it will be 0, so.
Mr. Emmons.
Thank you, Mr. President. You're basing everything on 700 kilowatt hours. Well, basically, how many of our residents fall into that category of 700 kilowatt hours per month?
Well, that's kind of like that is the standard, like, national average that most people use when they're doing anything for utility-wide, so I would.
I
say-
understand that, but
Yeah,
in
for our
Mishawaka, how
Mishawaka
many of our
residents?
residents fall into that category, our paying residents? I mean, that could be a fictitious number of saying you've got only 5% fall within that category.
Right.
Are we 50%, 70%?
I
Where
don't
are
have
we
that
at?
number, I could guess if you wanted me to, but I don't really want to guess, but I would say probably less than 50%. That's just based on the size of the houses. I mean, it's usually, that's 700 square foot. I mean, I average probably 890. Mine's a 2,000 square foot home, so I would say a lot of the houses south of here, south of McKinley, and most of the older neighborhoods are not 2,000 square feet, so I'd say depending upon where you live, that would be your average usage, would be probably at least 50% or less.
I'm just curious of how many households this is going to affect.
Right.
This raise, this pass-through raise is going to cost the residents.
Sure.
Just
can
to
do-
follow up to that, isn't it true that every ratepayer will be impacted by this? It's just the set percentage tacked on to their utilization so that everybody would see the impact. Is that correct, or am I off base there?
Yes, I believe that's correct. It's just, it's easier to show on a residential because it's standard, always the same. You know, it's pretty much the same. If you look at your bill for a whole year, you'll see you're really using the same usage every time.
Mr. Compton?
Thank you. Looking at the first page, and the formula is transmission rate times peak demand times days of the month equals the charge, right? Am I interpreting that correct? Towards the top
Oh,
of,
second page, sorry.
that's the mathematical
I
formula.
got you. Yeah, not the one with the date on it. I got you. Yes.
Okay,
Transmission rate.
the transmission rate and the days of the month, we can't do anything about, as I see it. Going back to, before I talk about peak demand, going back to what Mayor Wood said, what you're saying, after I'm hearing this, I agree, we have to pay it. You know, we're gonna have to bite our tongue and pay the darn bill. But looking forward, and I've mentioned this to you before,
Yep.
what we can affect is peak demand. So I want to know if we can produce power in our agreement with Wolverine. Can we put a solar field in Mishawaka that Mishawaka owns to reduce our peak demand? And on top of that, if we can't do that in our current agreement, then I suggest that we think about that in future agreements. And then the other thing is as I mentioned to you in discussion, home use of solar. I don't believe Wolverine can stop that. I don't believe there might be, but I don't believe there's an agreement that would disallow me to put solar cells on my home.
Correct.
And that is a way, if we would promote that in the city of Mishawaka, for a way for a citizen to help reduce their bill and overall bill to the city, I think it's a positive thing. 2 out of the 3 things we can't affect on this formula, but one we can, and that's to lower our demand from them. So I'm just asking that we take a serious look at the numbers, and it may be not viable, but I'd like it to be considered for the future. And for our council folks, there is a lot of upgrades going on, and they're needed. Whether you were adding solar or not, the grid was out of date and it needed to be upgraded. And that's going on, and that's not cheap and it's not free. And then when you throw in the way we're producing power now is changing, that adds more to it. And I don't see this, you know, next will come battery storage. That's becoming more popular. We're going to see more of that. There's a cost to that.
Yes, it does.
And that'll be put in with this as well.
Correct.
So if we can reduce our peak demand and encourage businesses and households, and then ourselves put in a solar field if that's possible, I think it's something we should strongly look at going into the future.
Sure.
Thank you.
Mr. Hazen?
That was one of my questions, and I think Mr. Compton might have answered it. This is to improve the grid. So do they give us, hey, we got to do this for 10 years and then it will level out? Or it's going to be ongoing forever and ever and ever? Do we know that answer?
I mean, I don't have a direct answer, but what we got from the field was, I wouldn't say on and on forever, but, you know, as demand goes up, then yeah, I mean, it's the same kind of system here. As you look around Mishawaka, you see a lot of electric cars, electric bikes, people wanting to put in charging stations. So, you know, we're looking at ours as well. You know, what is our distribution grid here in Mishawaka going to look like? You know, there's a lot of improvement, which is one of the reasons we're doing the upgrades right now. I mean, these are long-term projects. It's not a quick fix. If there's a quick fix, it'd be easy. But yes, there's, you know, we're looking into things like that.
Okay. My next would just be a comment. I'm just trying to understand all this. So AEP owns the grid. AEP joined the group for the PJM. They set wholesale pricing or the pass-through for several municipalities and companies, right?
This-
AEP being the biggest one that
In this
Is it-
region where we're located, yes. So it's a formula rate that they put together and actually goes to Federal Energy. So it's a formula they have to produce, they have to send it to them, it gets approved by them, and then it gets passed on to everybody who's a part of it, who's using it. So we're at the lower level of that.
Okay, so
So it's not
the,
something they just think of over the weekend and then just bill us for it, no. So it's something that has to be charged, it goes down, it gets regulated, approved, and then it gets dispersed over who's using how much, and we are a very large utility. So, like I said, we're the second largest in the state of Indiana, so it's a lot. But yes, we are, for Mike, we are looking into other options. And
Thank you.
the homeowners they look, I know there's a lot of YouTube videos out there right now, which is kind of giving false information that, hey, put on a solar panel and the electric company's gonna write you a check. I'm sure everybody's seen those on the YouTube videos. They're very incorrect, not accurate. Those kind of systems that they're talking about are different utilities as well. So we have a current contract right now, it's 10-year. I think we're into our second year right now. Part of that contract, nothing was negotiated for solar fields or renewable energy at that time. They do have options for that, so I wouldn't say Wolverine's, because they're very easy to talk, they're very open. They're not against anything, it's just our current contracts that we have didn't put that in the price point. So it was more of a, how do we get rid of this expensive cost, get into something sustainable, and then moving forward, those are available options, yes.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike, you just prompted my just thinking about other things, and I was wondering if you know what percentage of our power bill is generated by lighting.
By lighting,
By solar.
No, I mean by
in the
lights.
streetlights, or are you talking just in the?
I just mean in the home, what percentage of my bill in my house is generated by lighting?
Depends how many lights you have on.
So the reason I'm going with this is just,
This is
you're right,
gold.
but the reason I'm thinking along those lines is another way that we might be able to impact the peak is to encourage and educate people about LED lighting, because that does use less power, correct?
Yes, it does. If you buy the right stuff.
If you buy the right
I
stuff.
mean, I'll be honest, all that stuff's great. If you don't buy the right equipment or pay attention to what's on the box, what you're paying for, you may not be getting a very good deal.
Oh, in terms of the,
Correct.
Of
Just
the
'cause it says it's
actual
LED,
product.
you may have a 60-watt light bulb and you buy an LED, just assuming it's gonna use 4 watts. It's gonna save you a ton of money, but some of those have drivers and all kinds of stuff in them. So just, yeah, if people do the research. Yeah, I mean, I've converted my whole house to LED and maybe 10% on my house. But I also run around turning lights off since the kids turn them on, so. How long you got them on for? I mean, it all adds up, because it's just kilowatt usage, right? So it's just whatever's being used throughout the day.
right,
So I'm really vigilant turning my lights off, so.
okay. Thank you.
Sure, no problem.
Kevin, my colleagues have asked really good questions, and I don't mean to replow the same ground, but some of the issues that Mr. Compton brought up in his really good questions, he understands this better than I, so to help me understand, I'd like to revisit a few points.
Sure.
First of all, with regard to this pass-through and the current rates that we're paying, is the 2022 rate that all of us in the room who pay electric bills for Mishawaka Utility, is that reflective of a pass-through that was calculated based upon 2021 peak usage? In other words, is it calculated the year before and then it's captured, distributed out, and then you have to pay it after the fact in the next year or in future rates to cover that cost?
Are you talking for the PGM stuff?
PGM.
Moving forward, yeah, so it's based on your last year's. So
So
this
what
year's
we're
is
paying-
based on our peak of a 12 months, it's like a snapshot.
The preceding 12 months. Okay.
Preceding 12 months, kind of like, well, taxes, you know, the previous year, yeah, your previous year usage, and then they,
So as we're talking about pass-through and how we're going to handle that, for the, I guess for all of us, including the folks who are watching remotely, is this a conversation about what they're paying right now in 2022, increasing in terms of their rates in 2022, or what they write a check for every month? Or is it already baked in for 2022, and what's going to happen for 2023 is dependent upon the measurement of this 12-month cycle?
second part.
Second part.
So, yes, it would be The 2022 rate will go up from what you write a check for this month. If your bill's already been processed, you've already paid it. So we're looking at the average cost of being the $9 total from today's rate. So the $4 thing only came in effective, it went in November. So now we're talking the actual dollar amount could be about $9 if you use 700 watts.
And that was going to be another way to ask. What we talked about in November, this is the same conversation. We just have real numbers now that we're looking at.
Correct.
Okay.
Right. We were projecting it to be, I think, $6 at the time, so that did go up.
And for those of us who are looking for some good news in this discussion, and I'm going back to your first page and the chart at the top, the green bars.
Sure.
So even with where we're at with the 2021 PGM increase that's baked into this year's rates, we're still below what the rates, the total rates that were paid in the 2019-2020 rate cycle, correct?
Correct.
And that's in large part, if not totally, the positive impact that the move to Wolverine had with regard to our overall costs and what we pay.
Correct. So the big savings was the demand that we're talking about. They don't bill that in that, that's not how they do their billing. So we saved a bunch on that. Unfortunately, just nobody saw the PGM going up. Nobody's raising their hand telling us, hey, we're gonna do a bunch of work ahead of time, so.
All right. And clearly, the move to Wolverine has paid off positively for us, not only in this discussion, but beyond that.
Sure.
And if I understood you correctly, it's a 10-year contractual relationship. And whether or not there are some of the adjustments that Mr. Compton alluded to could be baked into the current relationship remains to be seen. But it sounds like they're a good partner to work with, and they'll at least engage in some discussion along those lines.
Yes, they do have other utilities, I believe, that have that.
But going back to, and this, I'm still working off the first page, the bullet points in between the two charts. And I heard you say, and it's written here, that the PGM transmission rates weren't locked in with the Wolverine agreement when it was consummated 2 years ago.
Correct.
Hindsight's always 20/20, and I'm not asking this question for finger pointing, but as we think about, as scary as it might be, what the next 10-year cycle looks like, is there an opportunity in a renegotiation of future agreements to try to guard against the negative impact of the PGM transmission rates?
Right.
Another way to ask the question, are there other communities or other entities that have contracted with Wolverine and have been able to guard against this risk within the confines of their contract in a different way than what we have in place right now?
Not aware of it. I have posed the question, but there was no actual,
Okay.
straight answer that yes, they have or have not, because it would be the same burden to them. That would be them taking the gamble that it would be worth the $7 million if it happened next year or something like that. I don't know if they would offer that or not.
And it stands to reason
Get
that
all that.
anything that would go into that would raise the other factors that go into the total cost, so it's kind of a,
If they did, I would imagine it would be a very short term, maybe a 1 year, 2 year, year-to-year contract if somebody was to do that.
You also talked about some of the things that you did last year that admittedly were less than ideal, to defer on some capital investments and some other things that, absent this PGM issue, would have already taken place. And I understand what you're saying, that this year's financial consequences is much larger than that, and you kind of had just a few moves to make on the chessboard, and you've already made those moves. But is there anything else, and I'm not advocating for this, but are there any really draconian things that you could do if the collective will was to do them in order to lessen the PGM transmission cost hit right now? So for example, and I agree with Mr. Compton, that reinvestment in the grid is critical, and it would be short-sighted to do it. But just as a exercise, a thought exercise, could there be some more deferred maintenance? Is it possible that some other things could be done to try to offset the blow of the PGM transmission increase, even if we don't want to do them and even if they're not a good thing to do?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay.
Not right now, nothing I can think of that would be a short-term gain for us. I mean,
So we really have exercised all the internal options that we had available to us to try to address it, and the pass-through component, it appears to be the last move maybe not literally, but virtually the last move available to try to offset that cost so that we can take care of the other things in the utility grid that need to be taken care of.
Correct. So we do a lot of preventative maintenance in our company. A lot of companies don't, but at our utility we do. And that's why we have usually very short outage times. So we have a substation preem preventive maintenance program that we do. There's a pole inspection that we do every year. So over 10 years, we have 10,000 poles. We try to get them inspected. So finding these and getting these equipment, numbers from last year, we know what we're doing for this year and next year. So we're holding off on those now for the last 2 years. And when you don't do maintenance, things happen. And then when things happen and they break, especially right now with lead times, I'm getting nervous on equipment because, as everybody knows, nothing's coming quick. We used to be 12, 13 weeks with a lot of our vendors.
Sorry.
Because of our size of the utility. We're up to 30 to 62 weeks. So some stuff that could break, I may not have spare parts for. So it makes me nervous to stop all maintenance for another year or two while we try to figure stuff out. And then we've got a big problem. We got a lot of broken stuff.
Well, I appreciate your patience with my questions. Thank you.
No problem.
So you can't open it?
Any other questions for Kevin? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor or any other members of the team, was there anything else that you wanted to share with us this evening?
Not much. This was, again, we wanted to do this based on a few years ago, honoring the council's wishes to bring these matters to the council. We are, again, a small nonprofit electric utility. We can absorb these kinds of, expenses that we get and without passing them on to our customers. Deferring our maintenance is, to me, not an option. I think we have the most reliable electric in this region. And when you think about the ice storms and the various events that hit, you see in the media all of the areas mapped out that are without power, the thousands of people that can lose power for several days. You never see Mishawaka there. There's a reason for that. And the reason is our top-notch staff, as well as the investments that we make in our grid and in our infrastructure, and the decisions that we make. Obviously, these improvements are not cheap, as Councilman Compton mentioned, and they're not free. And it's harder these days to do them because of the supply chain, the availability of parts. But we've kept up. So I guess now we were hoping to get something in place by January. That hasn't happened. We need it in place ASAP. So I guess we're open for discussion on how we go forward. So we would like to see the pass-through, as much as I hate it, as much as we all hate it. We need to pay the bill for the electric that we've got outside of our control into our system. And we need to pay that bill. And we can't absorb it. We have to pass it on. It's unfortunate, but that is the case. That is where we live in the world we live in.
So when we talk about options, just to crystallize what those options are, one would be for there to be a vote taken by the council as the legislative and fiscal body to approve these pass-throughs that have been discussed and, identified this evening. The other option, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, would be for us to have the pass-throughs be literally that, a pass-through that wouldn't require that almost illusory vote on the part of the council, because I agree with you. There really isn't a legitimate case I think you could make for voting no. You said it very well. We have to pay the bill. So it's either, do we take a vote that really is less than an authentic vote, since there isn't a viable no option, versus having the pass-through still be paid by the individual ratepayers. But it seems to me if we go down that option, What's as important as anything else is the communication piece. How are people going to understand what it is that they're paying? How are they going to place in context the rise in their utility bill? So from my standpoint, I tend to come down on the side of not engaging in an exercise in futility. If we can't really vote no, I don't see what's to be gained by that. But I think we all agree that that communication piece, however this is going to end up on the bill that people pay, that communication piece appears to be more important than some kind of theatrical action that we would take here. But that's just my opinion.
Well, and we're open to proceeding at your prerogative. Whether you want to vote on it, take action, whether you would like us to put out communication, we have that capability as best we can. That's not to say that everybody's going to see it or understand it, but, you know, we have our means of getting communication out, and we're happy to do that. And, you know, take our share of the blame for it. I mean, it's not anything we can control. We know that the bill comes due, and people point the finger at the electric utility or at me personally for something that we can't control. But, you know, however you want to proceed with this, we are open to that discussion going forward.
So our overall rate is one of the lowest around, right? And we can put that out there.
And most stable.
And this is a pass-through that I think we have to educate, like President Hicksonball said. I'm not for changing anything that we're doing on a maintenance schedule. I believe we have one of the best systems around. I've lived in the county, I've been under AEP. Sometimes you're weeks without electric out there, and we're hours, if that, without electric whenever we have a problem here. So I say we keep it the way it is, we educate the public the best we can, and that's just all we can do. I mean, this is not caused by you or us or electric or anybody, it's just a pass-through that. And it sounds like we're gonna be dealing with it for several years to come.
Mrs. Volker?
Thank you. I just wanted to, I just was on energy.gov, and there is education available that we might want to consider providing when we're educating, and maybe not this, but how a consumer can reduce electric use in their own home. And, I mean, it might be a nice companion to put out with the educational piece so that people do have, you know, some method to control their electric use. Just a thought.
That's very good. And we, like I said, we have our, you know, our vehicles to get information out, whether it's communicator in with the utility bill. We're also right now in the process of redesigning our website in conjunction with our move to our new building. So we can put some of those kinds of, you know, maybe calculators, or who knows, maybe we have that ability to really do a much better job on our electronic, you know, our website to get some of these.
And you may not need to reinvent the wheel. I mean, there are just maybe resources available that we can plug in that, you know, a local consumer could access.
Right.
And I suspect that we as a council, particularly my colleagues who host a regular series of meetings, that they'd be willing to partner with you on how we further that education and that communication with folks. What you've identified, Mr. Mayor, I absolutely agree with, but I think that here, the more ways that we can try to attack it and the more opportunities that we provide to people to be able to hear the information and ask their questions, I think everybody would agree that that will be in the best interest. So.
We can present at council meetings if you'd like to, just an update as we get them. You know, they're public meetings, and
Personally, I like that idea. That's just another way of trying to address the issue as comprehensively as we can. Mr. Belovich, did you have?
Well, you know, I think it's important that, you know, the consumers understand the fact that, you know, it doesn't matter if we were with I&M or AEP, just because we've switched to Wolverine, you know, we would still have this transmission charge for using the grid. You know, it doesn't make a difference. And the fact that I think if you know, we try to convince most of the consumers that, you know, there certainly is a legitimate reason for the upgrade in the grid, it has to be done. So consequently, you know, and maybe unfortunately, we're in the second year or third year of a 10-year contract, so. And the formula is consistent with anybody that's, any municipality that's using that grid, it's calculated the same way. So, going back to what Mr. Compton said a while back, maybe there's things that we can do if we could produce our own power. And I know, if you look at, I know Argus is doing some of that. And I think some other communities here in the area are doing that as well. Maybe we could investigate and look at what kind of an impact it may be having on their ratepayers.
Well, a couple things. First of all, I don't want to say this too loudly because we still have to work with AEP. We still deal with them quite a bit. But if we were still with AEP, this impact would be quite a bit more because we're saving pretty substantially by being with Wolverine over what we would have been with AEP, our previous provider. So we're saving money in that regard. This could have been worse. Secondly, if we're definitely willing to look at doing generation and doing that research. Just to tell you though, if we were to say invest in solar fields or windmills or things of that nature, they have a pretty substantial price tag, which is not built into any rates. So rates would then go up to invest into that, infrastructure. So they'd have to be passed along to our customers too. So even though we hopefully in the future can take advantage of some of those, sources of power, we would have to build them first, and that comes at a cost.
Any other questions or comments from the council?
I've got one for
Mr. Emmons?
General Manager of Electric.
I think Mr. Emmons has another question for Kevin.
Okay.
Thank you, though, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Just a question.
Sure.
There's a few homes out in my area that have solar panels in their yard. Are they saving much? Do you have an idea of these homes that have these solar panels in their backyard?
There's, I believe there's 7. There's not a whole lot in the city of Mishawaka. There's a handful of them. We use net metering. So basically what happens is when they're running off their solar, our meter's not charging them for the power they're using. Now, if it was more power than they needed, it doesn't go back on the grid because we don't have a way of paying them back. Again, we're under contract. Only purchasing power we can do is through Wolverine. I believe there's 2 homes that produce about 500 kilowatts, so almost a full house usage. But again, that's probably 3 months out of the year, obviously summer. But there's quite a few of them that we've noticed because I did pull some of those. I mean, I don't want to share them without people's information or giving us that, I won't give their addresses out. But yes, some of them have them on there and there's maybe nothing. I mean, if you look at the years before and the year now, there's nothing on there.
I was just wondering, like I say, in my area, I think I've seen 2 houses
Sure.
that have solar panels in their,
Right. And a lot of the
In the
solar,
yard.
which again, if we do the websites, we put some information out there. A lot of the solar information, again, those YouTube videos are very confusing. You put solar on your house, and if you're not home using it, you're not benefiting from it, right? There's nothing going on there because you're not actually using what you're getting from the sun to power anything at home, unless you put in the time or the money, which is where your money comes into a battery investment. So you have to store that power to use it later, and that's where the cost goes really, really high. That's a hard time to try and justify spending that kind of money on your home. It would probably take 20 to 30 years to get that money back. If you did it, from the prices we've seen, $20,000 to $30,000 total vested in an average home like that, so that you could reuse that. You all see the F-150 commercial where power goes out, he plugs his. Well, that's not free. That charging system and having the electrician come out and install all that equipment, that's very expensive.
because they don't have a field. They have about maybe 7 or 8 solar panels
Right, on the house.
in their yard. And I was just wondering how that affects their utility bill.
Sure. Yeah, there's only 2 that we've seen so far. One's right by Bethel College. You've seen that one. Almost the whole entire roof side of the house. He does a lot of work there. That one's the one that's doing the most. About 3 months out of the year is doing really well.
And I've talked to him before.
Yeah.
I think I've been to his house and seen his setup, and he does have a battery. He does store.
Correct, he
his
does store,
energy.
yes.
I have some information on solar panels. My sister who lives in El Cajon, California, where is 265 days of sunshine a year, they put solar panels on their house total. It cost them about, what's that, 10 years ago, it cost them, got the information from her, $25,000 to total, for their total house with the 30% tax credit that California gave them. It is now, they pay an annual utility bill of about $250 annually, and then her husband just bought an electric car, so it's about total for their whole house, which is about a 2,900 square foot house. It's a big, really big house. Their annual electric bill is $525. But they have invested all that money into the solar panels. In the first couple of years, they made money off the electricity.
Right.
So it's an investment, but it's well worth it if you have the sun,
Correct.
which we don't have.
Right, we don't know what their rates are, and we don't have.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the council?
Right, right. Sorry.
Thank you, Kevin.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Mr. President, members of council, Ken Prince, serving tonight as the president of the utility board. Why I'm up here is for two reasons. One, just for clarification, I'm getting the general feeling that the council would like the rate adjustment that'll be coming forward to include an automatic adjustment where you don't have to see this every year for the PJM pass-through. If that's not the case, please let us know, because we're happy to bring it to you or not bring it to you. That's entirely up to you, but I believe whatever is brought forward for your approval will need to reflect that, so we want to make sure we get it right. The second point I want to bring up is regarding solar, because we looked in that specifically for the new City Hall project, and using a life of the equipment at 30 years, and we can debate whether the equipment would be 30 years or not, it did not make sense to put it in at City Hall, because it did not pay back within that period of time. Keep in mind, I'll emphasize to the public, is we were not eligible for the tax credits that may in fact make it much more desirable for an individual versus government of putting it in. So we looked at it, it didn't make sense. That's different than the peak shaving that Mr. Compton was talking about, because that is something that we're looking at, but would likely involve a battery system as opposed to more of a generation system. But we have to have a consultant, people a lot smarter than me, look into that. So I just wanted to ask for that clarification and let you know what we did for City Hall. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Well, I'll address your 2 points. You know, the first one with regard to rates and the PMJ pass-through. To me, those are two different issues. I feel very strongly that this council should and must approve rate increases. The PMJ pass-through, I feel differently, because as we said earlier, there isn't a legitimate no vote. There isn't any option other than to pay that bill that the mayor referred to that comes to us. So to me, that's different than a rate increase. A rate increase has a different component.
Right. So our total rate, if you will, has three components to it. It's the Mishawaka utility cost, it's the generation cost, and it's the PJM cost. So I think we understand we have control, the negotiated power agreement here, we have control of our cost. The only one we're talking about is the what we're calling the pass-through. We get that, but that's overall part of the rate that is paid, so.
It is, and I'm hearkening back, and I'll, let others chime in, but I'm hearkening back to a conversation that I had with Mr. Hilt from Baker Tilly, and some information that he shared with me that indicated that there is not a requirement for the legislative body to take a vote with regard to that PGM pass-through. So that's whereas I'm talking about options.
Right.
I'm operating off that premise, and if I'm wrong, we can invite Mr. Hilt to the podium.
In fact, when we left the IURC, the council very specifically asked for every single one, including the pass-throughs, to come before you. So that's why we're asking for clarification of the change, because that's a change in direction.
And it's up to the will of the body, but, my opinion is that more traditional rate increases or decreases, as opposed to the PGM pass-through, those are two different animals, and I see little to be gained by muddying the waters of a rate increase by voting on that concept.
Something that we don't have control of, I understand.
But I'll
I
open the
second
floor.
that.
I agree with that. I'd like to know what it is.
Me too.
I think before that annual cost is calculated. I'd like to know as a council what that cost is.
Just
But I
as a
don't know that
standard-
we need
yeah.
to vote on it and hold these meetings necessarily.
Right, just as a standard practice, we should be notifying
Yes.
not only the council, but the public at large of
Well, yeah.
every year what that adjustment is, whether it's up or down, you should be notified.
And my other comment is while this isn't a rate increase, I think we all know that that the citizens of Mishawaka will see it as a rate increase.
Understood.
I mean, technically it's not, but that's how they'll see it, and I would see it, as a layman consumer, if you will.
Right.
And I agree with that, and again, that's why I think that the education piece and the communication piece is critical. So if there's gonna be a presentation that's somewhat similar to this at set intervals every year as the number becomes known, that has to be the beginning of a communication and education process to me, rather than the end. It has to be then those written forms of communication that the mayor indicated. It has to be all those other vehicles for us to get the message out, particularly this first time around, because people just aren't going to understand it. My goodness, we've had 2 meetings and you've been very patient with me, and I feel like just now the clouds are starting to part and the sunlight of understanding is starting to seep through. People aren't going to have that luxury, so how we communicate this point, from this point forward, I think is critical with regard to how the community reacts to this.
Very good.
Anything else for Mr. Prince?
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else from the administration at this time? And thank you, gentlemen. We're not going to torture Mr. Hilt by making him get up to the podium after you made that long drive from Indianapolis. All right, well, you guys are letting him off easy, but that's okay.
I want to get you up here just for us.
That's right. Any additional questions or comments from the council? All right, then, thank you to Mr. Mayor and your team for the information. It is not spiritually uplifting or good news, but it's news that we need to hear nonetheless, so we appreciate the information and the dialogue. And undoubtedly, this will be a conversation that we can continue in other venues throughout the community. So thank you once again, and with that, we will conclude this evening's informational session. Thank you, folks.